All right. First of all, hello everyone, and thanks for coming to OBO Academy. After a long time of focusing on these AI related subjects, today we are going a bit back into the kind of more classical parts of knowledge acquisition, like in particular one subject that is really, really dear to my heart and the recent sort of hobby and excitement for myself. With that, I just want to also give a little bit of a warning. Um, I have started looking into evidence about 4 to 5 months ago, and I'm kind of like in the process of pivoting in this subject area a bit professionally also, but everything is a little bit still, like new, and hopefully you will find a lot of mistakes in what I'm saying, but that's why it's good for me today to conceptualize this here as a training for you. So you can listen to it. You can tell me where you think that I'm wrong, but hopefully you can also get a few pointers into the subject. So we're going to talk to you. We're going to talk about ontology curation as it was meant to be, community deliberation over evidence today. Um, some of you have filled in this pre-session survey. If you're here and you haven't filled that in, I would still invite you to fill that in. I'll leave the survey open. A link has been provided by Sarah in Slack as well. And I will kind of like give a few hints of some of the things that came out of the survey throughout this presentation today. And here I'm starting with this one question where we asked, how critical is evidence in your curation workflow? And as you can see here on the left, we have the database people, about 40%. Just this is not anything like a proper survey. No, these are just a few respondents. So this is basically just indicative and not really anything that has any statistical meaning or anything, but just to get a bit of a sense, you see that for 40% of the people that are curating databases, every statement must have some kind of evidence, so it's a hard requirement, while this number is much lower for ontologies. But in ontologies, we have a very large group that says, okay, most statements must have some evidence, but some gaps exist, in particular for maybe some old classes and statements. So I will leave this question here mostly to say there is a sense that evidence is very important, and I think I share that sense very greatly. And so just to get ourselves warmed up a little bit, I've put a few Slido questions throughout this presentation. So I'd like to invite you to join slido.com at this session number here. I'm going to wait. Let me see how many people are here. We have 16. So I'm waiting at least until I get 8 people responding to the survey before moving forward. So if you could maybe try to log in and give answers, I will also do so right now with my phone. So the question is, you're a researcher that wonders about the following statement. Mondo, so Mondo term has exact synonym, blah, 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 with this ORCID. How are you interpreting the ORCID? So what do you think this person behind the ORCID is? An authoritative domain expert that was able to confirm the correctness of this evidence, of this fact. So this is evidence, or this is someone that suggested the synonym on the issue tracker. So thank you thank you. So this means this is an attribution statement, or someone performed the physical act of asserting this statement in the ontology. So, for example, the curator added this statement. So this would be a sort of provenance statement. So, who produced this statement? Or you're thinking about something entirely different. That's also possible. And you can select multiple things as well. Okay, so 11 answers, that's good enough for now, or actually 12. So what we can see here, and this is really expected, First of all, there is no very clear-cut interpretation. So there are a bunch of people that probably selected more than one. You can see that in the end, it could be interpreted as any of the three. It could be evidence, it could be attribution, it could be provenance. With that, we let it stand. We will discuss a bit later what that means. So I would like to kind of start the talk with rehashing my very, very simplified or maybe stupefied view of the beautiful cycle of knowledge acquisition so that we are all kind of like understanding of where my mind is during the presentation. So here, I just want to see on the right side here, we have a bunch of researchers that are generate observation in some kinds, in some senses. So for example, they make experiments, they make measurements, they make computation, they write written interpretations. So for example, a researcher might measure lead concentration in children's blood, and they might administer standardized cognitive tests to those children as well. And then we have analysts that formulate propositions based on all of these different observations that have been made. They synthesize these observations into claims about the world. So for example, you would synthesize into a claim like lead exposure causes cognitive impairment. And then we have it's the third part of the wheel, the curators that align those propositions here with evidence. Note, I didn't say curators translate these statements into database records. This is definitely also true. But for me, the key part of what you all are doing, and most of you are doing, as you could see by the first question that we have looked at in the beginning, you're collecting the supporting and conflicting evidence towards a proposition like the one below there. Then you evaluate their strength and provenance, and then you go ahead when you are satisfied and represent this proposition and its evidence in some kind of structured machine readable form. Now, this is just a stylized structure here. No one is doing it exactly like that, but just to get a sense. Of course, all of these people could be the same. All of these roles here could be the same person. This is not meant to say that these are all different people. I just want to make sure that there's no misunderstanding here. In all of this cycle, trust is the primary currency. So as an analyst, I ask myself, do I trust the observations that have been recorded? And only then does it make sense to even start with an analysis. As a curator, I ask myself, do I trust the analysis that led to this proposition that, for example, lead exposure causes cognitive impairment in order to put it into my database, for example? And as a scientist or researcher, I would ask myself, do I trust the curated knowledge that allows me to, for example, start formulating new hypotheses that I might make experiments to test? And here, this is kind of like where this whole kind of like storyline starts. To establish this kind of trust, we need evidence. And the key problem that we are faced with as a community is that there is no real shared understanding about what evidence is across the community. And there's also very little community deliberation over evidence. So this is something we will get to later. But right now, we do, when we are collecting and formulating and evidence, this is usually done by teams of curators that are specifically looking for evidence and not some kind of like a larger deliberation process over this evidence. The central argument basically underpinning this training and kind of like my hopefully career focus for the next years is this: as now knowledge production accelerates, maintaining trust and human control requires structured, collectively governed evidence. And that's kind of what we are trying to kind of like establish here in this first course, and hopefully maybe in the future, a few others. So what do I want you to take away from today? First of all, a good understanding about the differences between evidence attribution and provenance, then a good understanding about the different levels of evidence that we currently have in ontology and biocuration activities, then hopefully some kind of Conviction, many of you already have that, that evidence should not be a byproduct of curation, but its central tenet moving forward. And if we have time, as many of you know, I tend to run out of time in these kind of things, unfortunately. We will talk a bit about the world of tomorrow. So how can we shift our activities, in particular ontology and biocuration, towards more community deliberation over evidence? So let's look at a few examples. So this is a record that I copied from one of your survey responses up here. Sorghum, QTL Atlas, QGLFA1, blah, blah, blah. So you can see there's somewhere a DOI, there's some code, IDA. If you look it up, it's probably some kind of code that stands for some direct experimental evidence. You have a taxon, you have some kind of person associated, it's Laurel. And what I would like you to do right now is just to kind of look at this record just in isolation. You don't know anything about the schema. This is not a review of this record at all. This is just for the purpose of this training here. Look at this record and kind of tell me a bit about what you feel when you're looking at this information and the evidence presented in this record. So why you personally trust this record? There's no right or wrong answer. And where do you hesitate when you're looking at this record? So I already started answering. So my first initial responses is I trust Laurel. So that's a very important part of my trust in that statement. And I was wondering, does the DOI contain any specific evidence or not? So I would like you to kind of consider this a little bit, what you feel when you see this. Do you have any immediate responses? I'm not going to wait for 11 people to respond. I know these kinds of questions are more hard to answer, but I would still like you, if you are participating in this training, to kind of at least think a little bit about your own, recognition ability of evidence and what makes you trust in it. There are some people trusting Laurel. Someone is saying, I want more sources. And the trust, because I can go to the paper. And I trust that Laurel has identified an assertion made in the source. I trust that Laurel based this assertion on the source behind the DOI. Very interesting. All right. I would check the DOI. Exactly. Okay, I'm going to move us, assume the DOI includes evidence, though I might not go back to the DOI, exactly. So I'm just going to move forward. Thank you for your answers. So as for the trust question, I agreed with most of you. I trust Laurel. This makes me very confident in this. But just as a side jab here, only if that Laurel in that record corresponds to this orchid, which I know to be the real Laurel. So this is nothing to do with evidence. This is mostly about how do we represent our identities in our curation records. Side jab. I see some use of ontologies. This gives me a sense of trust that that whoever created this record has kind of thought about data standardization a bit. It increases a bit my trust levels. I see that there's some experimental evidence types there. This means, okay, they must have thought about evidence type, at least representations, and maybe even looks like it could map to something like eco codes. Of course, I can't really tell much without looking at the curation schema and the curation guidelines, so I'll leave it at that for now. Where do I hesitate? Like most of you, I looked at the DOI. I stared at the DOI. I wondered, is this peer reviewed? Maybe it would be better to have a PubMed ID, but then again, PubMed now has preprints. Is it really better? Anyways, I'm not going to check it. There's no easy way for me to verify the evidence. Does the DOI really support the statement? Maybe the curation schema requires it. I just hope that Laurel uses only DOIs that really support the statement. Okay, let's look at the next example. So here on the left side, this is a very partial example. You have a process, some kind of a therapy thing, I think, adenine base editing, some description, and we have some evidence records associated with it. You see here, there's a reference, there's a direction of support, there's an evidence source in vitro, probably referring to in vitro experimentation. Looks like an enum, so probably I could look it up. There's a snippet that looks like it's a statement directly extracted from the paper, and an explanation that sounds like someone has encoded a curated interpretation of how the snippet, how the kind of like the base editing here follows from the specific snippet provided. So yeah, I'm just going to ask you to do the same thing. So how do you trust, where do you trust this record, and where do you hesitate? So, doesn't matter what this record really is saying. The point is supported by in vitro evidence from this PMIT, as evidenced by the specific phrase, as interpreted by the specific explanation. So just give me a few kind of sentences, and if I see 5 or 6 of you responding, I'm happy. Best support is used in clinical practice. I want to see proof of that. So someone is not convinced by just seeing a few PubMed references here. I would trust it after having read about the evidence-based process of the source. Okay, so this is about, the evidence practices that were handled by the source itself. Already one level down. Very interesting. There are still 3 people typing. I'm just going to wait for 3 more answers. I trust statements like this for quick and dirty analyses, but if a higher level of trust is required, I would check out the source. What specifically is being supported, the existence of the approach, the efficacy, the outcomes. So with regards to this question, I have to say this is, I only copy pasted a very partial snippet here. So we would have to look at the entire curation record in order to judge this here, but it's a good point. Same as before, trust because I can verify the source, may change depending on that source. I trust that the assertion is more obviously grounded in the source. The previous example required me to trust in an honor system. Great. From my perspective, so thanks all for giving all these responses. From my perspective, I can see the exact text section used to derive the proposition. This is already cool for me. I can see explicitly the directionality of the evidence, which makes me think maybe whoever modeled this is actually also harvesting counter evidence. It gives me a slight boost of trust as well. I see the explanation or reasoning that as a curator authored interpretive summary of what the snippet means in relation to the proposition being asserted. So this is really cool for me to understand how did that agent or what person or whatever generated this thing actually say this is actually evidence for this specific therapy. And I can see an evidence source, which looks like an enum, so structured. I can probably formally defined. I could probably look it up. So all of this is great. Now, from the hesitation side, the first thing is I had no clear provenance of who curated the record, but more importantly, but this may be because I cut and paste the wrong slot. It might be that the provenance was stated somewhere else. But for me, the more clear problem is I didn't see clearly who interpreted that specific snippet. So is this something that, some curator that was responsible for the overall record curated, or was this some other entity that did that? And I hoped basically that the snippet is actually a snippet of a paper, but of course, this is something that we can easily verify also automatically if needed. All right, let me look at the time. I will do two more quick examples. So this one's I'm not going to ask you about, just to give you a bit of a sense. So here, this is an ontology statement. Someone defined this class 233 with this definition, and they said, okay, there's this xref to this ORCID, and there is a provenance, sorry, a prof like a provenance ontology was influenced by a statement to a specific DOI. So when I looked at this, I first thought, okay, wow, great, someone is actually using prof in an ontology as a real standard for provenance. That's really cool and gives me confidence that they did think about provenance. And of course, seeing an ORCID always makes me think, okay, someone is taking responsibility here. So if I disagree, I know who to blame for if I want to go and challenge that definition. So this is good. On the hesitation side, I still don't know what this ORCID really is. Is it the curator? Is it is it the in the sense of provenance? Is it the expert that corroborated the truthfulness of this definition? Is it the community contributor that went to the CHMO issue tracker and said, well, here, this is a great definition, use it and use it from this DOI or something like that. And you just wanted to credit that person for making that contribution. So yeah, this is just a bit of a sense of the ambiguity that this specific practice of using hasDBxref in particular makes me feel and think. And my last example here, this is a record from Mondo that was provided by, I think there were at least 2 or 3 people that were giving me records like that in the survey. And you can see my first feeling when I saw this record was, wow, a lot of evidence, it seems. Some of it seems even corroborated, like there are 2 ORCIDs associated with the same cross-reference statement that's being given. So it makes me feel like maybe these 2 people confirm that, this disease here, cytokine release syndrome, is mapped to this specific ICD-10 identifier. There's some concordance evidence. So it makes, for example, here you can see, okay, maybe this definition for cytokine release syndrome was sourced from NCIT. So this is also another kind of like, great evidence type, let's say, that gives me some confidence. And there's a link to a GitHub discussion, which makes me feel like, yeah, there was some kind of public discussion about this term. And maybe the public did have their eye on the creation of that term a little bit. Again, hesitation, properties are a bit ambiguous. What does source mean? What does xref really mean? Is it attribution? Is it evidence? Is it provenance? It's again the same problem as with the other records that we've discussed before. So just a quick insert here. When we asked on the ontology side, what kind of evidence do you capture? 93% of you said published literature references. So this is the primary thing that you capture. 87% capture the curator or expert attribution for the statement, and then and about 2/3 of you capture database cross-references, and all the other kinds of evidence things that are being mentioned here are significantly less. And one thing in particular that I just want to point out, no one is using any kind of more complex evidence modeling. I will get back to that towards the end of today. So here is the first kind of point where I just want to make a quick pause. We've seen a lot of examples about statements that represent different kinds of information. Evidence, attribution, and provenance are not the same. I just want to make it very clear that attribution here is about who asserted the statement. So this is mostly about nano attributions and about credits. So if you, for example, read the big Open Data 2025 report, to my horror, there was no mention of provenance provenance and evidence in that report at all. The big report with 60 pages or something, but there was a huge section about attribution and the credit gap for nano like curated statements, for example, in the open data domain. Then we have provenance. So this answers the question of how was the statement generated, and most of the time we simplify this to say who was the entity, the agent. Don't mistake when I say agent that I mean some AI thing. This is just an entity that has agency, that actually asserted the fact in the ontology, like not who created the statement. So this is a confusing thing, but who actually put it, went to Protege and added it, let's say, or put it into a robot template and added it. So here, this is the human. It could be directly the human curator, or a human curator extracted it from somewhere. But typically, this is about the activity. So it could be some kind of a human curated design pattern that is instantiated by OWL tools, or it could be a reasoner inferring an additional axiom, or it could be a lexical matching process that leads to the creation of a specific XREF, for example. And typically, provenance answers this question, like, when was something done? Who was doing it? Where was it done? What was done? Things like that. And evidence, and this is really about why should I, as Nico, believe the statement that is being presented to me? There are many different evidence types, like experiments, concordance evidence, domain expertise, and so on. And there are really cool ways to quantify how much I should trust in specific evidence items and their interpretation, and some way to gain an overall confidence in a particular statements based on these things. So these are all very different. And it is, just to say this clearly, sometimes okay to conflate these with each other, but we should do this very consciously. So a lot of what we call nowadays evidence, and what I think many of you called evidence when you were answering the survey, is implicit evidence, sometimes a bit risky conflation with attribution and provenance. So for example, we assume that an attribution means that an evidence appraisal was performed. We see an ORCID, we believe someone looked at this and was an expert and was able to confirm the truthfulness of the statement. Or we see the isolated DOI on a PubMed ID and we immediately think, boom, this must be some kind of actual support for the statement. Or we hope that the presence of a DOI and an ORCID or an ORCID indicates directionality of the evidence. So we think like they must be supporting the statement rather than, for example, providing a different view or a contrasting view even about the truthfulness of the statement. And so on. So I'm going to go through this example in a bit more detail now. Hopefully, yeah, I'm still good at time. So in practice, so one of the most kind of like widely spread and weird evidence type that we have is actually the implicit evidence by existence. So the fact that you can see here this Mondo term with cytokine release syndrome. So the fact that this term exists in Mondo makes us think, if it's in this ontology, someone must have evaluated it, and so it must be okay. So if I'm very extreme, I would say I personally trust Sabrina. Sabrina is responsible for all of Mondo. So by transitivity, every single statement in Mondo must be somehow trustworthy and correct. This is a very, very risky way to view things, but it is one that we all are doing all the time. So we look at EBI resources and we say we trust EBI resources because we know they have very strong let's say curation guides, or the same Monarch trusts MGI. That's why it takes all the statements that MGI curates and integrates them into the Monarch knowledge graph, let's say. So this kind of evidence is a very, very important evidence type, and a very implicit one. Next, we have record or term level attribution evidence. So someone said, okay, this person created this term, so we have to make this implicit assumption that if someone created this term, they must have thought all the kind of definition of these terms are probably sound and correct. So, and this is obviously also this is first of all very implicit and obviously very error prone because terms are changing. So the attribution statement will remain until the end of days, but it's possible that every single other fact about this term changes over time. The label changes, the synonym changes, things are being added, things are being removed. So this kind of like jump is also full of like possible fraud and mistakes. And if we come down to statement level attribution, so you have here the xref that has a specific ORCID associated with it. We have this implicit assumption we've discussed before. If the ORCID appears next to the statement, then this person must have evaluated the statement and they were competent to do so and they are accountable for it. Obviously, again, we have the problem. We don't know. Maybe the statement changed slightly because the resource owners thought of it more as attribution, but they left the person there. And again, we are conflating some kind of attribution level and authority level thing with actual evidence level, evidential support. And lastly, the issue about saying, okay, if we have some kind of like statement level provenance, like this definition has been sourced from NCIT from this concept, or it came from this paper, we assume this publication supports the claim. Discussed it before, this and why this is a little bit problematic. And one of the things that became also clear by the way that you've answered some of the question that we've discussed before is that, even if you see this, will you really go and take a look and to make sure that this is really the case? Or is this something that, you will leave it at that? You will see the evidence and you will think like, yeah, it probably supports the claim, and that's where you stay, and you will never really go and verify it unless you're a curator, obviously. So all of this here, this is kind of like my sort of hypothesis. Trust cannot continue to emerge from such implicit evidence. So if I see such a statement, this is not going to scale into the future as the only. This cannot continue to scale as the only way for me to build trust for these kinds of statements. So open data until now has worked very well because all of us, all these communities, the MGI, Monarch, OBO, ABI, and many of these groups, we trusted one another in what we were doing. And much of that trust has been grounded in these kind of shared practices, shared norms. We go to the same trainings, we learn from the same people. And of course, with reputation, we know that these people and these groups are good, and that's why we trust them. But it wasn't really rooted in any kind of explicit evidence structures. But now, as information production gets more and more and accelerates, also with the advent of these with the new artificial intelligence methods for data extraction, but not only that, also as we are in the process of where participation diversifies, so the groups that are contributing to such resources are more global. We have groups from Asia contributing to Mondo. We have that have completely different view of like what is a rare disease, for example, and we cannot continue to have trust emerge from just these kinds of implicit pieces of evidence. And we believe that I believe that it must be supported by some kind of explicit, inspectable evidence that can be evaluated. So how does this kind of explicit evidence record look like? So what you see here on the right side is one of the kind of most exciting things that I've seen in the last months. I was recently pointed to this by Matt Brush from TISLab. This is a part of a project. I think it's somewhere in the space of G4GH, ClinVar pathogenicity. I should have prepared myself better for explaining what this is exactly. But the point is that what is happening here in some of these kinds of groups is that evidence, concrete and much more powerful evidence models are being developed that are allowing us to do things like this. You have a statement like variation. This variation here is pathogenic for this disease, and you have evidence lines associated with that, and these evidence lines have different types and different evidence items. This might be studies, these might be other statements that have been made, and they all contribute to the overall kind of like evidential support of the original statement. And the interesting thing is that you can actually organize those kinds of evidence records in a really powerful structure, which is an evidence graph. So as you all know, if we want to reflect something like some paper kind of summarizes, or a meta-analysis says, this proposition follows because this and that paper have generated experimental evidence for it, and this other paper is based and citing a few other papers for support and so on. In order to represent all this, we see that this is kind of a very nested structure. So you can basically imagine that every single evidence line and every single evidence item and every evidence line again can be associated with other kinds of evidence lines. And only when basically you reflect the entire truthfulness of so the entire evidence tree like this, can you get a full picture of can you actually trust this statement in a more kind of in a way that is not based on implicit trust as we had it so far. Now, I know that many of you are thinking, okay, this is crazy. This is way too over the top and way too much work, and I agree. So I think that practically speaking, and we will get to that maybe in a future session, we should probably focus on something more simple first, like, more flat representation of evidence records. But I think if we really want to go to build a symbolic structure that really allows us to trust into specific statements independent of these kinds of implicit levels of trust, where we say we trust Laurel and that's why we trust it, then we need such a kind of graphical graph representation of all the statements and evidences for every single fact that is necessary. Now, when I asked what kind of existing techniques are you aware of for evidence modeling, you could see that many of these here are actually very kind of like subject area specific, so I didn't really expect many positive responses. But the two frameworks that had at least more than one person saying that they use it a little bit were ECO and Provo. So both of them, I think ECO is basically, as far as we can see here from the responses, the only really like widely used, let's say, structured framework for evidence that we have right that moment. But what I really actually wanted to know here is how many of you are using or at least aware of SEPIO, which is this framework that would allow us to describe these kinds of evidence graphs as the ones that I've shown in the earlier slides. And as we can see, not a lot of you, so there's a lot of work to do to do some education. So okay, so let's ask a quick question here. So far, are you convinced by some of these things that I said, or by your priors that we need explicit, carefully modeled, and expectable evidence? So as you hear, I am convinced, but I also know this doesn't have to mean that you are. So please let me know and be really honest. So just say, no, I don't believe this is at all what we should concern ourselves with at the moment. Yeah, so I will wait for at least 8 of you. Not like this is a simple question. I'll wait for 10 of you to respond. So there are actually quite a few of you that say we should focus to make the simple and often implicit models we currently use more um, uh, to make them probably more consistent or focus on spreading those more. Okay, there's 11 people answered. Okay, so there are 45%, so basically, I guess 5 people that are a bit convinced that we need better evidence modeling. But most of you are still saying like, maybe the kind of evidence types that we currently have are actually sufficient and we should focus on those because you are not yet trusting in the expensive investment and the return on investment from building something a bit more, a bit more complex. All right. So let's go into the last part of this talk. I will take away for now that there's a lot more kind of like convincing to be done. But I think that even if we will not end up with rolling out more complex evidence models in our domain, I think it's still quite important to at least recognize the ambiguity of conflating these kinds of attribution, provenance, and evidence statements, as we are currently doing, especially in ontology curation, and think about maybe even in small ways of how we can make those a little bit less ambiguous and less ambiguous to use by stakeholders that are further outside of our world, of our spheres. All right. So let's look at this little bit stylized history of OBO ontology. So this is not a historical account. This is just a very, very simplistic way to look at the kind of like how OBO ontologies evolved over time. So let's say in the 90s to the 2000s, we had individual databases that understood we absolutely need some kind of controlled vocabularies that we to describe our curation records. Towards the end of the 90s, some model organism database, for example, started understanding that it would be really beneficial to start investing into shared vocabularies like gene ontology. A little bit afterwards, they started to organize themselves in initiatives like OBO Foundry, which first started being talked about around 2002. I think really established around 2007, but I saw quite a few conflicting posts about this. I don't really know. It's a long time ago. But anyways, what happened then is basically some kind of consolidation of these ontologies. Overlapping ontologies were merged together. Others were added and evaluated and made interoperable. And then when the 2010s started, we started kind of like, but what still happened in the 2000s is essentially that you had like project-based or small groups basically building individual ontologies. But by 2010, we started seeing larger and larger kind of consortia looking for building ontologies together. And also this massive kind of revolution in the ways that we use tools that helped us to build more interoperable ontologies. And OBO started thinking about this idea of like a grand unified ontology of biology and biomedicine. And by 2020, standards are kind of like widely implemented. We have a nice metadata vocabulary that we've consolidated against. We've sort of agreed to use ORCIDs to identify the people, the kind of the curators that are curating our records. We use DC terms for a lot of things in the ontology. So kind of a lot of standardization, and consortia are also becoming better at managing ontologies. But the thing is that the driving force here behind these processes is still, I need a term. So we have databases, and the needs of the databases are driving the evolution of the ontologies. And they are saying, like, I need a term for this specific project. And the question is not so much, let's coordinate what we know about this domain. So what I'm kind of proposing here is to try a shift in thinking towards about three aspects. So the first one is a shift in thinking towards community deliberation. So basically, for now, until now, we have had that ontologies were basically boxes for terms we need for curation. And the first kind of like tweak in thinking that I'm proposing is to think of ontologies as a place where we encode scientific consensus about terminology. So what do I mean by this? So for example, if we are encoding what synonyms are being used for a specific terms, what definitions we use for these, for example, for our diseases, what do we record about the location in which the disease is happening? All of these things should be basically a consequence of a global community coming together and thinking and agreeing about basically agreeing about these facts, rather than individual groups that are driven by the need for terms deciding these things in isolation. And I have to say, this slide really just didn't work at all. So I need to revise this a little bit. Sorry about that. And I will send some materials about this to really make this a bit more clear. But the second big thing that I'm hoping to induce is to think in terms of evidence first. So as automated systems are getting more and more effective at extracting information from raw data, we still have the problem that explanations are disconnected from the reasoning that these automated systems have. So for example, you let an AI system extract facts from for example, scientific publications, but when you say, let's say you go and ask the AI systems, why did you present me this kind of information? This explanation is not really connected to this process of extraction in any way. So what you really want to know when you see a statement in an ontology is you want to know all the evidence that is associated with the statement, so that you can apply judgment over this evidence, over the strength of this evidence, and over the confidence that you have in the evidence interpretation. So let's say the AI system is extracting, for example, a fact like a synonym from the literature or something like that. You want to be able to really see, you don't want to just see, ChatGPT said so, but you want to be able to convince yourself that this statement is justified because of a verifiable PMIT, for example, that has been extracted, plus a level of confidence that you had that this PMIT was correctly interpreted towards extracting that specific synonym. So so here I think that the shift towards thinking in terms of evidence first really is central to create basically a fabric in the future where ontologies serve as basically the trust providing infrastructure that can be used to say, where is this fact grounded? Where does this information, the synonym, come from? And basically as the collection point for all these kinds of explicit pieces of evidence. And lastly, lastly, basically the idea of that we should move away from like focusing on data extraction to evidence modeling. So historically, we've always said we need to read this paper, we need to extract the facts, we need to put them into the ontology, or we need to put them into our database records. But what I believe is that over time, where these automated approaches for data extraction become better and better and better, and they will, and maybe are already more consistent and perhaps even better, and even if they're not better right now, they will be better in the foreseeable future. In this part, we should consider redesigning our own roles in this process from extractors towards something more like evidence stewards. So we will encode our subjective trust in evidence types. We encode our trust in the data extraction processes explicitly as curators. We set an evidence calculus where we say, given these pieces of evidence and our trust in the agent that extracted this kind of evidence, this is our belief in the truthfulness of this statement. And we periodically review these kinds of assumptions. This is, I think, where we should slowly head as reconceptualizing ourselves as curators. And of course, reconceptualizing ourselves also as community moderators. As we are entering a more global field and tackling more global problems, we need to learn to better kind of accommodate and attract inputs from a global community, from wider and more diverse groups, and integrate their viewpoints into our let's say, curation and evidence collection systems. So putting it all together. So let's say we have a scenario like this. So this is just like a stylized process. Like, okay, everything in the last 3 slides was a little bit abstract. So I want to put this in a bit more concrete form so that you get a little bit of a better sense of the way that I'm currently thinking about it. And hopefully you can disagree with all that I'm saying. But so let's say I'm coming as a proposer and say I want to add this synonym to the ontology. I open a GitHub issue, and immediately, of course, the community comes and says, "Oh, Nico, this is not really exactly the synonym that should be used in this case. Maybe we should be using this other kinds of synonym." Yada yada yada. So you have like a first initial kind of community input. It has nothing to do with what I just said before. And then what we have some kind of system that gathers evidence from the literature, for example, from various other forms of evidence, concordance evidence from other databases, for example, and many different things to create an evidence record. And this evidence record, for example, looks like this. Evidence line 1 says, in this case, Orphanet said this. Another one says, this PMIT also said this. Another one said, this evidence line is basically me making an initial statement, also said this. And the other counter proposal by the community is evaluated. We also gather evidence in much the same way for this. You have one evidence from Levin's line referring to the person that made this proposal, another one pointing to a specific publication. And then that's kind of the key point I want to kind of emphasize. So far, no curator was involved in anything. Sabrina, what she did was basically she defined carefully the evidence calculus that basically defines what kind of facts should be allowed inside of a Mondo, and this evidence calculus basically works like this. You look at each evidence line, you assign a specific strength to it. Like, for example, this has an evidence strength of 90%, and we trust in the interpretation 90% because, for example, a human curator extracted this evidence line and presented it. Or here we have an AI agent extracting from a specific paper in evidence line. So we say the strength of the evidence is very high, but our trust in the fact that this evidence item was extracted correctly is a little bit lower because it's done by an AI system. Or here, where I said something, we have 10% confidence, let's say, that what I as Nico said is means anything, but we have a very high belief that that this fact was correctly extracted because I explicitly added it to the issue tracker. And based on these kinds of metrics, Sabrina will set an evidence calculus for the whole ontology, saying, okay, given all the information that is presented here, some completely gibberish formula that has nothing to do with reality. This is just for you to think in terms of there is a calculation based on these things that leads to a rational outcome, and then a threshold. If the overall evidence is larger than X, this fact gets added to the ontology. She basically completely removed her own self and her own judgment from this specific question. So she didn't need to intervene in this specific evidence curation process. And if, let's say, the only part where Sabrina will become active again is if the community comes and says, okay, there's a bit of a mistake in the way that you're judging orphanet evidence. In fact, this evidence should be judged more strongly. So Sabrina goes, maybe adjust some of the priors in the kind of Mondo belief system about this, and then recalculates the overall threshold for this specific piece of evidence being admitted. So based on that threshold, the fact gets added into the ontology. Well, with that, I'm really sorry for boiling the ocean a little bit. This is extremely early kinds of thinking, and as you heard, I stumbled across some of the slides a little bit towards the end in particular, but I hope that at least you got a bit of a sense of that. First of all, for me personally, that I think an evidence-driven curation process is going to be really central for us if we want to maintain trust in the resources we build. So let's be brutal. If we do not have any evidence in our ontologies, the question is do they really have and will continue to have the value that we currently have for it, while we still have a lot of implicit trust in the age to come? I don't believe so. I think we need more explicit evidence. So with that, thank you very much. Unfortunately, it's exactly 59. I didn't realize the time passed by so much, but yeah, that's, let me see if I can quickly, nobody should ever trust Sabrina. Anyways, of course. Can someone maybe quickly give an overarching question about anything that was said in the chat or anything that they think before we close? Okay. Let's see. Anyways, well, that's it then. Time is up. Thank you very much for attending. And yeah, if you want to collaborate or kind of help me bring this kind of line of thinking a bit more forward in the next years, then please reach out. I'm very, very interested to really make that become a realistic reality moving forward. And other than that, we might be thinking about new kind of courses around this subject in the future. So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for that.